In that very deep spiritual journey, I was aware of that oneness with the divine, of that pure love force at the core of the universe as being the very source of my own conscious awareness. So we're never far, never distant from that God force. And when you study near-death experiences in large numbers, you start to realize it should be obvious to everybody that there is a loving, infinitely powerful God force at the core of the universe. But a lot depends on belief. There's a quote I love from Rene Descartes. He says, if anyone would claim to be a true seeker, there must come a point in your life where you have rejected everything you ever believed before. I had to reject everything I'd ever thought was real about this universe and start over from square one. Just knowing about NDEs can help people come into the same transformations to the positive in their life and help in their soul growth. No doubt about reincarnation. It fits into this like a giant puzzle piece. But ultimately, the biggest lesson is not just to find out what happens when we die, when our body comes to an end, but, how do we live this life every day, every breath we take? You change your focus when you know more and more about near-death experiences.
Dr. Eben, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being here.
Well, Fuad, thank you so much for having me on. I love this kind of shared topic of interest. I think we can go into some fascinating territory with all this.
Yeah, same. So before we get into the specifics of kind of exactly what you saw in heaven and what's the wisdom that you got from every step along the way, could you give us a brief context of what led up to this mystical experience?
Sure. I had grown up in a neurosurgical family. My father was a globally renowned neurosurgeon. It's important to point out I was adopted into that family. That's a huge part of my story for anybody who's paying any attention, is that I was put up for adoption when I was 11 days old. And yet my birth mother, who was unwed and 16 years old at the time, was unwilling to sign the papers to let me go. And so I spent 4 months languishing in that baby dorm, waiting to be adopted until she finally decided she would sign off on me. But the reality is all of us have a kind of a similar kind of separation wound. Because we're all ultimately spiritual beings who have come into this world. Now, that is not something I would have told you before my coma. I wanted to believe in much of what I had learned growing up. My father was very scientific, but also very spiritual. He believed in the power of prayer and in a loving personal God. He had a lot of questions about some of the dogma of the Christian religion we've been taught, but by and large, he certainly gleaned the depth of kind of love and kindness and compassion and helping others. That's what he did. That's what he taught me to do, to take care of other people. That's what I loved about neurosurgery. And yet, like so many others in our culture, I was sucker punched by into believing that materialist science, our conventional science, not quantum informed, but our conventional science, was the way the universe worked. And that was what I awakened to deep in my coma, and the medical details of my coma are what helped drive me there as a scientist. Because in fact, when you study the medical details of my coma, as is published in a case report by 3 doctors not involved in my care, but fascinated by my recovery, you find this brain was not in any shape to have a dream or hallucination. That's why the medical and scientific community take my story so seriously, because the medical details of the case are very damning to any kind of materialist pseudo explanation. And yet this all happened, and plus you've got my recovery to deal with. As the peer review editors of that journal challenged the doctors who wrote the case report, how do you explain this miraculous recovery? They said it's because he had a near-death experience. They knew of other cases of near-death experiences resulting in tremendous healing. And that really is the biggest lesson to all of us, because it shows the potential we have as spiritual beings as we come to admit our spiritual nature and our connection with that God force at the core of the universe. It allows us to manifest that world of our beliefs and dreams, and that is what enables such miraculous healing in these cases. That was really what I had yet to discover. And I've worked with scientists around the world in the 15 years since my coma to make better sense of it. Many of them are physicians, so they're interested in healing and how this is so pertinent. The power of prayer, different modes of kind of invoking our spiritual nature have tremendous capabilities of bringing us into wholeness and healing. But ultimately, what we must admit to get into that whole kind of level of interaction with the universe is that we're all interconnected. We're here to take care of each other. Binding force of love is the ultimate kind of glue that holds us all together. And this is a lesson that this world is needing to learn, obviously, and yet it offers tremendous hope for prosperity and for thriving of the species, thriving of the planet. All of this can emerge from a deeper and richer connection when we take care of each other and recognize that binding force of love is a force of healing and comfort.
That's so amazing. And the fact that you were a neurosurgeon before just makes your case so much more powerful. For you, it wouldn't have made sense if it happened before and a patient came and said, I had a near-death experience, I recovered that fast, and all the rest. And so that's what I love about this. And that's why I want to ask you all the questions that just intrigue me. The first one is, how was your journey to heaven? So did you just land in heaven right away, or were there steps that you had to take to ascend?
Well, there were steps of ascension, and it's important to point out one of the atypical features of my near-death experience, and near-death experiences are always tailored for the soul having them, period. That's their purpose. And it turns out the rest of us can learn a lot from these, but ultimately they are structured to greatly enhance the growth and transformation of the soul involved. And so one of the key ingredients of mine that's very unusual, in fact, I've never heard of it to such a severe degree in anybody else's NDE, was amnesia. I had no memory of Eben Alexander's life, and that part was very mysterious, especially when I came back to this world and was trying to make sense of it and compare and beginning to learn a lot about other near-death experiences. But the amnesia is a crucial part, and you'll see as the story unfolds why that amnesia was critical for my particular journey, for the understanding that I was headed for in all of this. And what happened then was, so I had no knowledge of Earth, the universe, none of my language, every bit of it gone. It was an empty slate. And when I first came back to this world trying to explain it all, before my neurosurgical knowledge had come back to me, which took about 2 months, I was, to me, it was all way too real to be real. It was astonishing, that ultra reality that was so kind of mind-blowing. And my first attempts to share it with my doctors when I was first waking up, they would just pat me on the back and say, well, we don't even understand how you're coming back to us. You were so ill, we were sure you're going to die. And yet you can forget about it because the dying brain plays all kinds of tricks. That's what they told me. So, wow, what an incredible thing to go through. So I was my own worst skeptic from the get-go. But getting back into your question and my ascent into that level. So it all started in what I call the earthworm eye view, a very primitive, coarse, kind of unresponsive realm, like being in dirty jello. I remember kind of a sensation of feeling roots or blood vessels all around me. You could kind of sense everything out going off into this murky, muddy mist around me. And the good news is it didn't last forever. There came a slowly spinning white light with a perfect musical melody. And that white light opened like a rip in the fabric of that ugly earthworm eye view realm and led up into this brilliant, ultra-real gateway valley. Now, this is where it's important to tell people near-death, often if people haven't had one, they think a near-death experience would be kind of murky, dreamlike, vague. It's the exact opposite. This world, the material world, is murky, dreamlike, and vague by comparison to that world. That world is sharp, clear, crisp, meaningful, powerful, detailed. I mean, when you study these things scientifically, you can interrogate people 20, 30, 40 years after their NDE, and you find that the memories of the NDE are very stable and resilient. They're also very transformational and healing. That was one of the things that got Dr. Bruce Grayson, who's a skeptical medical scientist who studied these things for more than 45 years. That's what intrigued him, was as a psychiatrist, he recognized that these events that people had in an NDE were completely changing their lives in a very positive fashion. Most people who have an NDE come back very kind of loving of others, focus on relationships with others, much less interested in materialism. NDEers are also much more spiritual, but less religious. And we can discuss that a little bit later, but spirituality just rings true. And for me, the definition of spirituality is we're all interconnected, and that is something you sense in these extraordinary journeys, is we're all together in this, and we're here to take care of each other, and also a sense of shared meaning and purpose. That's really all you need for spirituality. You don't need 2,000-year-old scripture or anything like that, even though religions can be very beneficial at helping people develop their spirituality, but unfortunately, ideologies can take away from that tremendous value. But back in my story, so entering this Gateway Valley, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing, millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations, colors beyond the rainbow. And I'll also remind your listeners that this Gateway Valley, this is the kind of area where people would have life reviews. And that tells you something very important about the spiritual realm. It's an eternal realm. It is not limited by the events of earth time and the flow, the apparent flow of earth time in our existence. So that once you're in that spiritual realm, you're completely outside of it. That's why people who describe near-death experiences often talk about a life review. 25 to 50% of series on NDEs will talk about life review, your life flashing before your eyes. But the interesting thing is, in a life review, it's not just you, it's you experiencing the events of your life, but from the perspective of others, the ones around you, those who were affected. In many ways, the life review proves to us we're sharing the dream of the one mind, and that these life reviews offer an opportunity for teaching, learning, and transformation of the soul. But it's a much greater wisdom that reflects that we're part of that greater whole, and that we're really truly bound together through those binding forces of love. And that's how we can come into wholeness and healing. So in this Gateway Valley, what I was witnessing among these swarms of butterflies, and I was on the wing of one butterfly looking down onto this meadow, this beautiful, lovely meadow surrounded by a rich forest. There was no signs of any death or decay. In many ways, it's like Plato's world of ideals, but for the individual soul. And in that setting, I witnessed thousands of beings down in the meadow, and they were dancing in joy and merriment, their children playing and dogs jumping, incredible festivities. I mean, I cannot even begin to use words to describe how beautiful, loving, connected, transformational this incredible scene was. And the best part about it was I wasn't witnessing this alone. Those who've read the book Proof of Heaven will realize that I had a beautiful spiritual guide, a companion, a guardian angel, if you will, and she was with me on the butterfly wing. And in fact, reading that book, you'll find out 4 months post-coma, when I got a picture in the mail, all of a sudden I connected all the dots and figured out who that beautiful guardian angel was. But that's getting ahead of the story a little bit. So let's go back deep in the midst of this. This beautiful girl with her sparkling blue eyes, high forehead, high cheekbones, broad smile. She was dressed in the same kind of simple yet very colorful garb that all the beings dancing down below were dressed in. She looked at me with a look of pure love. She never had to say a word. Her knowing was delivered telepathically into my knowing. And in that moment of connection, her message to me, which I think was a central message I was to bring back to this world, was very clear. And the words that I used to describe that message weeks later when I wrote it all down, because it was delivered as pure conceptual emotional flow, not as words at all. But in that delivery, the message was, you are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are richly cared for. And I cannot tell you how important that was. Now, the other part of that message that I put in the book Proof of Heaven, you can do no wrong. Now, I wish I had expanded on that in the book, because people tend to take that the wrong way. I thought I made enough that by being in this beautiful, loving realm with this God force of love that was the ocean in which we were bathing in that incredible experience, and people would understand that when you go through a life review, you realize you have a choice of love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, or a pathway of greed, of selfishness, handing out pain and suffering to others. We have choices in this life. And that is the most important recognition I saw, was that in that realm where life reviews would occur, so many of the events of our life would look terrible in that setting. because of selfishness or greed or what have you, our egotistical, narcissistic qualities, what have you, just are horrible. And so that is not the pathway forward in that realm. So when I said you can do no wrong, what that meant was you have free will and the choice. But it's clear that the choice is to acknowledge growth of the soul in a positive direction, which is always about love, kindness, and compassion. And that's the guide for the choices we make in life. And that was the great wisdom of it. And so hopefully people will understand that, you can do no wrong in a better context, in a higher context, that I certainly was living through the kind of length and breadth of the shared dream we have through the one mind with all of our fellow beings, that we're here to learn and teach through the living of these lives. The interesting thing is, it was crystal clear to me in this journey, and very different from my religious upbringing in a Methodist church, two things of special note. One is a sense of becoming one with that God force, which I'm going to describe in a second, and the other is the notion of reincarnation. I mean, this entire journey, the fact that you could never do it in one physical incarnation was crystal clear, and that our souls must come back again and again for this process of elevation, enlightenment, and transformation. So I had to come back and find that scientific evidence for reincarnation, but it's everywhere once you know where to look. And the scientists who have studied it, there's no doubt about reincarnation. It fits into this like a giant puzzle piece that's very important. So in my journey, though, in this butterfly wing, with this beautiful guardian angel, that was only a gateway. As I said, I called it the Gateway Valley. Because what I remember seeing next is all of the material world. I could kind of glimpse that there were aspects of the lower material world plodding along with its kind of fictitious Earth time. And I saw all of that collapsing down. But more importantly, I saw the spiritual realm, the beautiful Gateway Valley. That place of eternity where birth, death, everything in between can be revealed to you simultaneously, in a life review. All of that collapsing down into what I call the oversphere. The oversphere was this complex teaching tool as I ascended through a tunnel. This portal was just like the portal I had entered through, that portal of light coming up from the earthworm's eye view. Well, now I had a musical portal that was delivered by those swooping orbs of angels above, these angels that were emanating chants, anthems, hymns that would thunder through my awareness with this incredible majesty, awe, and beauty, and sense of being home. I use all these words to describe it, and it sounds pretty fantastical, but the most important thing to stress is there were memories in my soul of, yes, this is our true home. This is what I remember. And I think that's why so many people who read the book Proof of Heaven, when it first came out in 2012, thousands of people contacted me because it reminded them of something deep within, a memory that they discarded or what have you, or forgotten, because there is this huge process of what I call programmed forgetting, where we're not meant to always carry information from that realm back into this realm. And that's especially important in that reincarnation literature, where doctors Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia, who have studied more than 2,700 cases of past life memories of children, indicative of reincarnation over the last 65 years. And of those 2,700, 1,700 are solved. That is, they actually identified the person who lived before, described by the child. That's a huge number, and that lends to the concrete reality of reincarnation. But the important point that these physicians who do these cases will tell you is you must harvest these memories before age 6 or 7, because after that, the children start forgetting them. They're gone. Just like most of us, when we hit teen years, adult years, we don't have ready access to memories of past lives and between lives, and yet a lot of children do. So in ascending into this highest level, that's what I call the core. Yeah. For me, it's as far as I went, but it was a complete resolution of all dualities. We're used to a world of dualities, good, bad, darkness, light, masculine, feminine, all the different kind of ranges of events in our lives. And yet in that realm, everything coalesces into this crystal of perfection, in that God force of pure love at the core of the universe. important to remind your viewers that more than 90% of near-death experiencers, going back across all cultures and continents for thousands of years, more than 90% of these reports, the narrative is one of people being certain, not just belief, but a knowing in the reality of a loving God force at the core of the universe. And, given that these are souls that have dived deep into that experience, why would we let a lot of people who've never had the experience tell us what actually happens and pretend, oh, when you die, nothing happens? Because that's all I remember was nothing. Some people will say that. But, 1 in 5 people who have a cardiac arrest have memories of a strong near-death experience. That's a lot of people, many hundreds of millions around the world who have been through this. So anyway, in this core realm, that's where I came to recognize that oneness of the divine. In fact, what I came to see was that my very conscious awareness, and this is far removed from Eben Alexander's little ego mind, I promise you, but in that very deep spiritual journey, I was aware of that oneness with the divine, of that pure love force at the core of the universe as being the very source of my own conscious awareness. So we're never far, never distant from that God force. And when you study near-death experiences in large numbers, you start to realize it should be obvious to everybody that there is a loving, infinitely powerful God force at the core of the universe that definitely takes great care of us in these spiritual realms. But a lot depends on belief. You can get stuck in your beliefs if they don't allow for this kind of thing, because our beliefs often will govern a lot of what happens to our soul, especially when we've left the physical body. And I think some souls can get trapped there. If their belief systems are too kind of closed down, they can run into trouble and not necessarily be able to move on to next levels. But this is why it's so important for the world at large to come into this deeper knowledge, which we can all do through personal experience, through centering prayer, meditation. There are ways of going within. And once you realize that the mind is not just something generated, here in a 3.5-pound gelatinous mass floating in a warm, dark bath between my ears, but that mind is a shared mind of the universe. That's what we recognize in near-death and similar experiences, is we're all in this together through that shared kind of mental force. Well, anyway, getting back to my journey, many lessons taught at all different levels through this, I would spontaneously tumble back down from that sanctum sanctorum of the core realm, of that pure oneness, back down to that earthworm eye view. And it was by remembering the musical notes of the melody that I could conjure up that pathway getting back into the Gateway Valley. Always welcomed by that lovely young woman, spiritual guide, who still is very present for me in deep meditation. And she was always there offering me that message of love and connection. And I would harbor all the energy from that beautiful realm. And then the angelic choirs provided that music that led me to the highest and the highest levels again, to the core realm. And the core was where I witnessed life reviews and reincarnation in very powerful form. Even though I couldn't have an Eben Alexander life review because of my amnesia, I could witness life reviews. I saw them in this giant form in both what I call the flying fish vision, which was an early passage through the core, but far more impressive was what I call the Indra's net vision that occurred later in a passage through the core, where I had this vision of all these interwoven threads. And these threads led to this golden center of kind of a pure God consciousness at the core of the universe, at the core of all creation. And each one of these interwoven threads were our soul lines of incarnations over multiple lifetimes, all leading to this brilliant growth. So in other words, this concept of reincarnation is not so similar to Buddhism, where you're trying to get off the wheel of suffering, but it's much more one filled with grace, growth, transformation of all of consciousness throughout the universe evolving together. And that's really how I saw in this Indra's net vision of reincarnation, seeing all of us in this much grander form, participating in this incredible growth of consciousness itself, as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin pointed out in his book, Phenomenon of Man in the mid-20th century. Anyway, I would tumble back down, as I said, and there came a time when in the core, I was always informed, you're not here to stay, and that I'd be going back. And I even had come to realize, because I kept going back down that earthworm eye view, that just by remembering the musical notes of the melody, That was enough to bring me back up in the Gateway Valley in the core. That was all I was worried about. But all of a sudden, there came a time when I fell back down into that earthworm eye view realm, and the remembering the musical notes, the melody, no longer conjured up that light portal. And to say I was sad at that point would be an understatement, but I knew I could trust. I'd been through that Gateway Valley, promised by that beautiful guardian angel, and into the core, promised by that infinitely loving God force. I would be cared for, so I had no doubt about that. And it was then that I saw thousands of beings going off around me into the distance, and now I'm back down in that kind of earthworm eye view realm, the very primitive starting point. And what I recognized was murmuring energy coming from all these beings around me, all these kind of human-appearing figures with heads bowed, some holding candles, and they were murmuring. And it was a prayer of some sort. That's how I interpreted it, although I couldn't understand the words. But somehow that was leading me back to this world. And also at that point, that's when I saw the 6 faces that bubble up out of the muck. They'd say a few words and disappear. My amnesia was still in effect, so I didn't understand the words. But those faces were very important because 5 of them were physically present in the ICU room the last 24 hours of coma. And there were many family and friends who had been there earlier in the week who were not in my memory. So that helped me to realize that the vast majority of the coma journey, the spiritual parts, had to happen between days 1 and 4 or 1 and 5 of my 7-day coma. The coma was due to bacterial meningoencephalitis. And in fact, the medical case report goes into how extraordinary my recovery was, how damaging the medical parameters were, and how they were very convincing that that brain was really in no shape to harbor any kind of dream or hallucination. And so it's at this point when I saw those faces that it was the last face I saw that really got my attention the most. It was a 10-year-old boy, and I didn't recognize him at the time. It was my son Bond. And that name Bond is a lot more appropriate than I'd ever realized in the first 10 years of his life. But he was really my bond to this world. And in fact, it turns out that was Sunday morning, day 7 of coma. The doctors held a family conference where they told my family I'd gone from a 10% chance of survival down to 2%, but with no chance of recovery. They'd seen no evidence of any neurologic recovery. I've been on a ventilator for 7 days on 3 powerful antibiotics, and no positive signs. So that's why they were saying it's time to take me off the ventilator and let me go. They had protected Bond from the worst news during most of that week, but he overheard that conversation, and that was alarming. So he came running down the hallway into Major Bay 10, pulled open my eyelids that had been taped shut, and one eye looking over there, one eye over there, neither pupil working. Anybody in medicine knows that's a horrible picture. And I promise you, I didn't see him with my eyes or hear him with my ears. I was far too gone from this world. And yet his pleading with me, Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. Somehow that got through. I didn't understand the words, but now all this journey, because of my amnesia, I thought this continue or it can cease, doesn't matter. But now everything mattered. Because there was another soul out there, and somehow I didn't understand the words, but there was this connection I sensed with him, and I had to get to him and help him in some fashion, and yet I had no idea how to do that. And that's when I ended up coming back to this world. In fact, when I woke up in that ICU room, as my sister Phyllis, younger sister Phyllis, tells me, because I don't remember, when I woke up in the next 36 hours, I was in and out of a paranoid, delusional, psychotic nightmare, an ICU psychosis. Those memories faded within weeks. I'm glad I wrote everything down. The memories from the deep coma experience are as sharp and vivid and detailed today as if the whole thing just happened yesterday. Big difference between those two sets of memories. But anyway, as Phyllis told me, within 20 minutes of waking up, I'm sitting on the bed, and there the whole family, nurses, everybody just surprised that I'm coming back to this world. Couldn't believe it. It was defying what the doctors had predicted so strongly. Even though there were some, alarming signs early on that I wasn't coming back completely. That took 36 hours for me to really kind of come back in force. But Phyllis said I was sitting on the bed, and it was the most amazing thing. She said I looked like a little Buddha. And I would look at each and every person around me, nurses, doctors, family, what have you. I'd look them in the eyes and I'd say, don't worry, all is well. And then I'd move on to the next one. And she said it was so bizarre because for me to be reassuring them that all was well when I was just emerging from this insanely death-defying coma, how do you make sense of any of that? So it took 2 months for the memories to come back, and I've spent the 15 years since my coma working with scientists around the world to come to a better model for consciousness, which really seems to point to a form of idealism or panentheism, where the mind is ultimately determining what happens in this physical universe. And it seems to be a united mind, that kind of God force mind. And so we're all really borrowing a little eddy current of that God force in our mental ability. And that's why meditation and centering prayer can be so powerful at getting us right back in touch with that God force when we open our minds to this possibility and when we gain experience. I meditate an hour to a day. I've been doing that for more than 11 years using sacred acoustics, a form of differential frequency brainwave entrainment. But all that is stuff we can talk about whatever you like. So you can lead off.
Once during a meditation under a tree, I experienced the oneness you're talking about. And so I felt I was connected to everything. I felt connected to the trees, to the strangers, to the birds. And the funny part about that story is I looked in front of me and there was a bird, and I looked at him in just pure awe, pure love. Exactly what you described, and kind of connecting with the source. And the bird jumped in front of me and jumped on my knee and just stood there for 30 seconds looking at me.
That is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And that is, I hear stories like that all the time. I've been through my own kind of connections with animals and nature, just incredible sense of oneness. And it's really something we should all open up to. And the important thing, of course, is to turn our little ego voice, it goes into timeout. So many people think that they identify with that little running stream of thoughts in their head. And I love how Michael Singer in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls that running voice in your head your annoying roommate. That is it. That is not your consciousness. Your consciousness is your awareness, the awareness of existence. And we're really sharing that property with the universe. And that's the part that really expands and comes alive when we leave the physical brain and body. So it's not the little ego mind. And the ego, of course, serves its own little purpose. But remember, the ego is right there at the heart of all addictions, with fear of death, with all kinds of fears and anxieties. Mm-hmm. That's what the ego uses as its tool. And that is not who you are. This is where meditation, and again, I would, for people who don't already have a powerful technique, I would suggest sacred acoustics, binaural beats. It turns out they're a form of audiophile, where two separate tones of slightly different frequencies can affect the lower brainstem. And I think that's why they're so powerful. Every musical piece you've ever heard that might have inspired a transcendental or spiritual experience, a chant or anthem or hymn, they're all processed up in the acoustic cortex of the temporal lobes, circuits that have basically evolved in the last 2 to 3 million years in Homo sapiens and primates. Very different from the circuits that interpret sacred acoustics and similar binaural beats. Way down in the lower brainstem, those circuits are more than 300 million years old. They came along before mammals even walked the earth. And that's why that circuit can be so powerful at opening up for extraordinary transcendental spiritual experiences in deep meditation. That's why I highly recommend it to people. But if you already have a great technique for meditation, go for it. But it's always about silencing that little voice in our head, the ego mind, and letting our higher soul really take over.
That's exactly what I felt. I felt like, because prior to that meditation, I was deeply, deeply stressed. I had 8 assignments left. It was the final year of uni. And I just saw the garden and said, look, let me just give it a shot to try to center myself before I go into study. And what I realized is that when I meditated, the voice shut down. And that's when I felt the most peace. And so, and that's why I felt the oneness. And I want to ask you a question that really interested me about your journey. Is when you came in touch with what you call the core, or or God, what did that feel like? Was it a face-to-face experience? What was the experience in your being?
Yeah, it's not face-to-face. Mm-hmm. It's recognizing that at the deepest level, that God force is the source of my conscious awareness. So it's not like you're looking at God and conversing with God, it's you're recognizing that God force as the very essence of your conscious awareness. That's how close it is. And it's also a feeling of incredible, indescribable kind of warmth, oneness. I often hear a similar thing, I think, described. People talk about in meditation the state of non-self or no self, where you really, that ego piece is just gone. It's just not there anymore. And you've become that kind of universal consciousness with a tremendous amount of wisdom and understanding. It's a really kind of beautiful and magical space, especially with all the anxiety in our world today, all the polarization and conflict.
Yep.
To be able to spend 20 or 30 minutes a day in this beautiful place of peace, connection, and perfection, with love, bathing in an ocean of love. It's really a situation of all is well. Just as I was saying on the bed when I first woke up, all is well, don't worry. When you have this perspective, you recognize that none of your kind of earthly problems or trials are insurmountable. In fact, all of them can elevate you to a higher level. I came to recognize the hardships and difficulties in life in many ways are gifts, to embrace them. I came to see that my adoption that I'd seen in most of my life as a problem issue, that I'd been abandoned by my mother when I was 11 days old, that it was in fact a tremendous gift, offering me resilience, offering me an opportunity to see and prove my own sense of oneness and love with the universe at large. And that's really how this whole thing is unfolded into an incredible kind of sense of all is well. Because when you have this perspective, especially as you come to realize that near-death experiencers are not only gifted with that beautiful sense of loving God perfection that is at the source of everyone's soul and that binds us all together, but they all are able to kind of bathe and enjoy that. And bring it back to this world in a form of healing and wholeness and helping others. And that's where I think meditation is so important. But ultimately, the biggest lesson of meditation and of studying near-death experiences and related spiritual experiences is not just to find out what happens when we die, when our body comes to an end, but, how do we live this life every day, every breath we take? You change your focus when you know more and more about near-death experiences. Ken Ring, who was one of the founders of the International Association of Near-Death Studies back in the 1970s, wrote in the 90s about how just knowing about NDEs can help people come into the same transformations to the positive in their life and help in their soul growth. So just learning about this, then spending some time on a regular basis in prayer, meditation, all of this is important, but ultimately it's about how we live these lives and the choices we make and how we deal with our fellow beings. And the more we can hand out love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, when necessary, forgiveness, the brighter and more kind of golden and rewarding and transformative our lives become, as do the lives of those around us. So it's really about a transformative message. I know people are concerned in the modern era with all the political polarization, warfare, things like that. But ultimately, we each have the power to bring love and kindness and compassion into our lives and into this world at large. And it doesn't take the whole world to do this. In fact, in meditation studies, they found that if you get 2 to 3% of a community meditating, that's enough to create a tremendous positive benefit in that society, in that particular culture, in that community. So just a few of us trying to, help guide the way, help share through the forces of attraction with our fellow beings, the way towards greater oneness and sense of love and completion in life. These are all gifts. And just in terms of dealing with the anxiety of modern life, there's a pilot study in the peer-reviewed literature that fully supports sacred acoustics as giving a 26% reduction in anxiety symptoms over 2 weeks versus only 7% in patients who got standard talk therapy for anxiety over 2 weeks. That was a study by Dr. Anna Yusim in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, published in February 2020. And Sacred Acoustics is still offering a very discounted version of the Whole Mind Bundle, which was the set of audio files used for that scientific study. that showed such a tremendous relief of anxiety. If that's all you want in life is to relieve some anxiety, obviously this is a very powerful and proven technique. But what you discover in meditation and going within is you can do far more than just relieve anxiety.
Very interesting. I love that you propose simple takeaways to apply for a more divine life, which is really powerful because you've literally been to heaven. And so you're teaching people how to have a bit of a glimpse of heaven on earth, which is really powerful. I do have a question about, to get into reincarnation, or even to go into the spirit guide, and to more specifically, how did that happen? And what did you feel when you discovered who the spirit guide was?
Well, that's a great question. Well, initially, my doctors had told me, dying brain plays all kinds of tricks. We have no idea how you're coming back, but wow, you can forget about it. The dying brain plays all kinds of tricks. So great, I've got that message. So I was my own worst skeptic from the get-go. My neurosurgical knowledge was not yet back to me. I had not yet fully uncovered all the medical parameters of my case, which are really damning if you're trying to say that brain was capable of producing a dream or hallucination, because there was a tremendous amount of damage to my brain. And so it was, I think that the thing that was so amazing about it all was in going through that process, I really had to doubt everything. There's a quote I love from Rene Descartes. He says, if anyone would claim to be a true seeker, there must come a point in your life where you have rejected everything you ever believed before. And I was at that point. I had to reject everything I'd ever thought was real about this universe and start over from square one. And that was the right thing to do. It was a beautiful gift, especially because I've come to realize there's a tremendous scientific revolution going on. I'm on the scientific advisory board for several groups, two of which people can access online. One is called scientificandmedical.net. The other one is called GalileoCommission.org. And if you study those sites, you'll realize that science is a long way towards proving the reality of the spiritual nature of the universe. It's really right at the core of where all of the study of the brain-mind connection and a quantum-informed version of neuroscience and philosophy of mind. There's this kind of circling Newtonian deterministic model of neuroscience, where people think that neuron firing is a completely deterministic situation from the viewpoint of Newtonian determinism and materialist science. And that's the exact opposite of the truth. To start to unravel this, you have to realize that everything we've ever experienced, according to modern neuroscience, our phenomenal experience is the result of all those neurons in the brain, the 100 billion plus neurons in everybody's brain, creating this kind of model. Well, it turns out that each and every one of those neurons, whether they fire or don't fire, which is the only language they speak, is completely determined within the realm of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. For ions and for synaptic vesicles holding neurotransmitters, things like that, they all function completely at a quantum level. And as many quantum physicists over the last century have remarked, consciousness seems to be fundamental. Max Planck, Erwin Schrödinger, Pascual Jordan, Eugene Wigner, and others, they all talked about how you can't get behind consciousness. It's fundamental in the universe. And the only problem they had was there wasn't enough study yet of things like near-death experiences, shared death, other forms of non-local consciousness, remote viewing, telepathy, all the evidence we have in the current era that mind is not produced by the brain, but in fact is a more kind of generalized field of connection throughout the universe. And that's where everything starts getting very exciting. And that's where these websites that I just listed minutes ago will take you. That's where our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, will absolutely take you. For anybody who still needs more information, go to bigelowinstitute.org. You will find 28 essays that were written in the year 2021 to answer the scientific question, what's the best scientific evidence for the continuation of conscious awareness after permanent bodily death? And at bigelowinstitute.org, you'll discover 28 papers. Originally, Bigelow was going to give out 3 monetary awards for that contest. He had lost his wife. His son had committed suicide. He wanted to know, do scientists really have an answer? And he got a very affirmative answer. And this from a group of people who all had to prove at least 5 years of rigorous research experience in checking out the afterlife question. And if you start reading those essays, you'll realize it's no longer a question as to whether or not science agrees that the afterlife and reincarnation are real. The scientific evidence is overwhelming. You might claim that you're too lazy or ignorant to want to read those papers or don't care enough, and that's fine too. But the evidence is there for anyone who cares to prove the reality of the afterlife. Those Bigelow essays go a long way to doing exactly that.
So we have a couple of viewers that have asked questions, and there's one of them that asks, that's called at George Samara 90, that's asking you, is there past lives, and did you see other souls you recognized?
Well, in my journey, the soul that I recognize is the one you already kind of pointed out in questioning, and I didn't recognize her at the time. You know, when I first came back, I'd never read the NDE literature before. I started reading it like crazy, but only after I'd written down 20,000 words, because my older son, Eben IV, who was majoring in neuroscience at the time, he gave me a big hug when he came he came home from school where he was studying neuroscience. Day before Thanksgiving, 2 days after I got out of the hospital in 2008, he gave me a big hug, said it was like there was a light shining within me, as if I was far more present than I'd ever been. And I told him it was way too real to be real. And that's when he told me, well, write everything down before you read anybody else's NDE. Because he knew from neuroscience study that every time you revisit a memory, you change it. And so he wanted to make sure I had a fresh version of everything I could remember, and that's what I did. But the more I did that, and then when I started reading the NDE literature weeks later, I was very confused. How could all this happen? And this beautiful guardian angel, she was supposed to be someone very important to me in my life. And yet I knew her so well from those multiple mind melds we'd shared that I knew I did not know her from this lifetime. And that was the start of a huge mystery. And of course, those who've read the book Proof of Heaven will know the answer. And I'm not going to give the full answer here, but I'll hint, a big hint, has a lot to do with that adoption story. That was, for me, the tremendous eye-opener. And I think for so many people who read that book, it's where they go, oh my God. Because for me, when I saw that picture 4 months post-coma, it just dropped me to my knees. I couldn't even stand for more than 30 minutes. I was blown away by the power of this incredible demonstration by the universe that I had really gone through this experience. There was no way to doubt it. And that ultra reality was because it really...
And to finish this off and to not take more of your time, I just want to ask you one final question. It's...
Okay.
Throughout this entire journey you went through, how do you feel like coming back? Do you still glimpse heaven in your meditations?
Absolutely. I've used my meditation to recover not just memories from my NDE, but to develop a very active, ongoing relationship with that beautiful spiritual guide. And also in the book, Living in a Mindful Universe, we talk about how I finally encountered the soul of my adoptive father. You know, he had passed over 4 years before my coma. If I had scripted it, he would have been there front and center. And yet he was nowhere to be found. And in fact, he answered that question himself in a deep meditation about 2.5 years post-coma, where in one, what I call a thought bloom, where all this information comes instantly, not in a linguistic form, but as a completely formed set of concepts. That occurred in a connection I had with him for the first time since he had passed over 6.5 years earlier. So that was an extraordinary experience, but I've used it, meditation, to develop a very rich ability to go back to that NDE, but also to help others. That's one of the things I try to do, is in meditative techniques, give away clues that will help other people to access that beautiful realm. And it's mainly a process of letting go. And diving deep into that ocean of consciousness and recognizing that consciousness is not created by your brain, but in fact the brain is a filter. And it allows in an eddy current of that primordial God consciousness. And that's where we all have this interconnection. But in meditation and centering prayer, you can traverse that veiling function of the brain and get back into that primordial mind where we have a shared consciousness that's not limited by time or space. And that is where, all bets are off, and the belief systems are wide open for what they can show us about what is real, about our connection with the universe. And what I would encourage people to do is investigate. Spend 20 minutes or more a day in deep meditation. If you need a tool, use Sacred Acoustics. Certainly, Living the Mindful Universe is a very helpful resource, but also there's a 10th anniversary edition of the book Proof of Heaven that has 36 additional pages in it that go far beyond the original book. And for anyone else who just wants to keep in touch, do it through ebenalexander.com, sacredacoustics.com, and of course, there's also innersanctumcenter.com, I-N-N-E-R sanctumcenter.com. And that's a site Karen and I put together that has many resources available. There were interviews we did during the pandemic every 2 weeks for more than 2 years with thought leaders around the world on consciousness. All those interviews available for free, innersanctumcenter.com. There's also a mental health practitioner course we did with Dr. Anna Yusum available for practitioners at a cost, available on that site, and also a monthly webinar that Karen and I do that's accessible through innersanctumcenter.com. These are all ways people can interact with us, communicate with us, learn more about all this, and just bon voyage, people. It's an incredible journey.
And so this is the end of the episode with Dr. Eben Alexander. So as a summary, we saw how consciousness is just this pure, loving force, right? He said he ascended from the earthworms to the gateway valley to then the core. And through that ascension with the spirit guide, he felt the love, the oneness, the interconnectedness of all beings. And look, I'm a person that doesn't believe right away in things. I have to pick my truth. And bro, I had a meditation and I felt what he was talking about. It is true. And so that's one part of it. Then he talked about how meditation and prayer and sound acoustics can be used to have a certain access to heaven on earth. And so it's important to have a daily practice of meditation, whether that's 5, 10, 20 minutes. Just try it out. Make it a habit. I've been meditating for the past 6 years. The past year or 500 days or so, I've meditated every single day. And I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying this because it's been the most peaceful period of my life, because I've chosen to put that habit as a priority. And so please do the same. You will see huge benefits. I know a lot of people feel stuck and feel they're not progressing with meditation. You won't see results right away, but it's the accumulation of the compound effect where you will see pure peace, pure love, pure connection with the divine. So incorporate that habit. Now, something really interesting he talked about also, and I had a lot of notes, but he just went through it and literally answered everything. I didn't have to ask any questions. I was really interested about reincarnation, and he said how clear it was that we are here learning lessons. We are here to learn and grow. And once you ascend, there's a life review, right, in heaven, where you see not what your point of view, but how your actions impacted others. So their point of view, how they felt because of your actions, how they reacted. Literally, you feel it from their sense. And so then it puts kind of a responsibility on us. What are we making others feel? What are we making others feel? That's extremely important to keep in mind, because it's the purpose of our life, right? The purpose is to love, as he said. The purpose is to help. And the purpose is to be of service to all those around you. And do not underestimate how much power you can have. Because the ripple effect you can have, like dropping a rock on a still lake, can be huge. And so take your meditation as a non-negotiable. Take being more loving, more of service, more helpful as a non-negotiable. And as Dr. Eben said, elevate your consciousness, because that's the purpose of our life, is to become more and more aware of the divine inside every single one of us. He said of the power of letting go of the ego, that incessant, annoying neighbor, as he said, quoting Michael A. Singer, is not you. You are the awareness behind it. And so I will leave you with that. And the next week, we have a very special episode with Yogi Dada, a meditator who's meditated over 21,900 hours and who's gained extreme wisdom on mindfulness and meditation and all the rest. And so tune in for that episode next Sunday. It's been your boy, Adi, on another episode of the Rich Inside podcast. Let me know below which part did you enjoy the most. Comment below your experience. Do you believe it's true? Do you believe it's an illusion, an hallucination? What do you think? My opinion is it's true. I just intuitively know the feeling, especially the feeling of oneness and pure love. I felt the truth. And you could see throughout the interview, when it moves to my shot, sometimes I was tearing up. And it's because I felt the truth of what he was saying. And so let me know what you think. And yeah, thank you so much for investing in becoming a happier high performer. See you the next time.